If you open that door, don't ever think of coming back." His voice was low, dead calm, but it cut through the room like shattered glass. Jessica's fingers trembled against the brass handle, her breath catching somewhere between her ribs and throat, behind her. Brian stood just feet away, arms crossed, jaw tight. A silence so loud it made the air hum. She didn't turn around, didn't dare. The hallway was dark except for the porch light flickering just beyond the glass. And on the other side of the door, someone waited. Someone who could shatter everything, or save it. Jessica had rehearsed this moment 100 times. The packed bag under the bed, the hidden phone, the bookmarked number of the shelter her stepmother had quietly passed her months ago, written on the back of a grocery receipt. All those secret plans now balanced on this one trembling moment. Brian took a step forward. The hardwood creaked. Her skin flinched before her body could. "Is it him?" he asked. No need to explain who him was. Jessica swallowed hard. Outside, the knock came again. Not loud, but steady. A rhythm she remembered from years ago. Knock, pause, knock, knock. She hadn't heard that sound in almost a decade, but her heart knew it. I said. Brian growled, "Is it him?" Jessica turned the handle. But before the door opened, before the truth stepped into the light, everything around her slowed. And she remembered. The way people do when they stand on the edge of something irreversible. She remembered cinnamon, vanilla, sunlight slanting through the kitchen blinds. And a voice, so soft and sweet. It had once wrapped around her like a blanket. "Breakfast is ready, sweetheart." Diana Miller wore her blue dress that morning. Lipstick, soft like cotton candy. Hair braided tight. There were 2 mugs on the table and a tiny jar of wildflowers between them. Jessica, just 7, still small enough to sit cross-legged in a kitchen chair, had looked up at her mother and asked, "Why are you so dressed up?" "Because every day with you is a celebration." Those were her mother's last words before everything changed. Jessica didn't know how hearts could stop beating. Didn't understand how someone so full of music and stories could simply vanish. But the next day, she was gone, and no one ever said the word dead out loud. Just sick. Just gone to a better place. Until one day, a woman in a pressed gray suit showed up and packed Jessica's toys into a cardboard box. "You're going somewhere safer," she said. Safer didn't smell like cinnamon. It smelled like bleach. The state facility wasn't cruel, just cold. Everything there was metal and schedules and no softness. Jessica learned not to cry. She learned to hide the photo of her mother in the sole pair of shoes that didn't squeak down the halls. She learned that kindness was currency and silence was survival. And then one day, Daniel showed up. He said he was her father, said he never knew she existed, said her mother kept her a secret. He had the same gray eyes, the same chin. He brought her to a house in Austin, with clean linens and a wife named Lisa, who wore sweaters that smelled like lavender. And for a while, it felt like maybe things could be okay. Maybe Jessica got good at pretending. She said thank you when people gave her things. She got straight A's. She folded her laundry like Lisa taught her, but she never stopped listening for footsteps, the ones that came fast and angry. Because some part of her had learned that the world wasn't safe, even in houses with flower curtains, even with men who said you can call me Dad. Years passed. College came like a new chapter, fresh air. Tall windows. Books piled taller than her. She studied early childhood education, wanted to help kids who didn't get lullabies, kids like her. And then she met Alex. The knock at the door. That rhythm. It was his. It had always been his. But she hadn't opened it. Not then. She married Brian instead. The man with tailored suits, confident hands, and a smile that impressed everyone except her children. And now, years later, that choice stood behind her like a shadow. "You walk through that door, Jess," Brian warned, his voice dropping into a whisper. And this family is done. Jessica reached for the handle anyway. Because on the other side of that door wasn't just Alex. It was the life she was supposed to live. The one her mother would have wanted for her. The one her children needed now before it was too late. She remembered the way her mother's voice wrapped around her like sunlight. Warm, steady. The kind that made the world feel safe, even when it wasn't. Back then, mornings smelled like cinnamon toast and vanilla creamer. Diana would hum old Motown songs while flipping pancakes, soft, off-key, but beautiful. The kitchen wasn't big, just 2 chairs and a wobbly table by the window. But to Jessica, it felt like the whole world. One morning, her mother wore her best blue dress, hair braided, cheeks blushed, lips the color of pink lemonade. She poured orange juice into 2 glasses, set a plate of toast down, then smiled across the table. "Why are you so dressed up?" Jessica asked. Diana brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because every day with you is a celebration." Jessica giggled, swung her legs under the chair. She didn't know those words would be the last memory she'd have of her mother's smile. That afternoon, they went to the park, fed the ducks, held hands a little tighter than usual. Jessica remembered the way her mother sat on the bench. Quiet, not sad, not angry, just quiet. She turned and asked softly, "Do you know how much I love you?" Jessica nodded, a lot. Her mother kissed her forehead, tucked a curl behind her ear. "No matter what happens, Mama will always be with you, right here." She touched Jessica's chest, her heart. That night, Diana read her a story, a fairy tale about a girl who lost her way and found it again through kindness and courage. Jessica fell asleep to the sound of that voice, slow and steady like a lullaby. And by morning, she was gone. Jessica remembered running down the hallway, calling out, thinking maybe her mom had just overslept. But there was no answer. The bedroom light was off. The bed still made. People came, men in navy uniforms, a woman who spoke in hushed tones, neighbors who stood with their arms crossed, avoiding Jessica's eyes. Someone said heart failure. Another said she was so young. One man whispered. There were no signs. Jessica didn't understand. Hearts don't just stop. Hearts are supposed to beat forever. She kept asking where her mother went. When is she coming home? No one answered her directly. They just used words like sweetie and honey, and offered stuffed animals she didn't want. 3 days later, a social worker named Marlene arrived with a clipboard and a car seat. Jessica watched her pack a few clothes, her favorite book, and a photo in a wooden frame her and her mom at the zoo, both of them grinning with snow cones in their hands. She clutched that frame like it was oxygen. When Marlene reached for it, Jessica screamed, "I want my mom!" Her voice cracked. Her throat burned. She wrapped her arms around the bedroom doorframe and refused to move. But eventually, even that gave way. They buckled her in, drove away, left the only home she'd ever known behind. The group home was painted a tired beige. The hallways smelled like powdered eggs and something sour. A woman named Carla gave her a cot by the window. Lights out at 8. Wake up at 6. Sheets changed on Fridays. Jessica didn't speak. She just nodded and cried under the blanket when the lights went out. Her roommate was a girl named Tasha, 9 years old, and already wise in a way that hurt to watch. "You got family?" she asked the first night. Jessica whispered, "I don't know." Tasha shrugged. "That's bad. Kids without people don't get picked." Jessica didn't understand what picked meant. She would learn later adoption, fostering, the ways children became someone else's responsibility. She learned fast. How to fold her clothes just right. How to stay silent during mealtimes. How to keep her head down at school. She never let go of that photo. Never. Until the day it cracked down the middle when a bigger kid knocked it from her bunk. Tasha leaned over and whispered, "Hide it. People steal everything here." From then on, Jessica kept it in her pillowcase pressed close to her at night. The lie she told herself every evening was simple. "Mama's in the hospital. She'll be back soon. She'll come for me." She had to. 6 months passed. Jessica stopped asking questions. She stopped waiting at the window. But the hole in her chest stayed the same, tight, sharp, pulsing whenever she heard someone call Mom in the hallway. And it wasn't for her. She grew into that pain like skin. Started talking less, laughing never. Began to believe what Tasha said. Some kids just don't get picked. Some hearts don't beat forever. Some stories don't have rescue. Then, one gray Tuesday, a man in a crisp blazer stepped through the front doors. The director called her name, not Jess, not sweetheart, but her full name, Jessica Miller. It felt foreign in her ears. He stood in the office, tall, nervous, holding a worn photo in one hand. The same photo she kept under her pillow. Same eyes, same chin. "Hi, Jessica," he said. "I'm your father." Jessica didn't know what to say. The word father didn't mean anything to her, just a blank shape in her mind where something important was supposed to be. The man stood there with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name was Daniel Cooper. He had flown in from Austin. Said he'd found out about her through her mother's obituary. Said a friend of Diana's had reached out. Said he'd taken a DNA test and filed guardianship papers just last week. He was careful with every word, like he didn't want to scare her. Jessica stared at him from across the desk, arms stiff at her sides. She couldn't stop looking at the lines around his mouth. He looked like someone who'd smiled once, just not lately. "Why weren't you there when she died?" she asked, her voice small. Daniel looked down. "She didn't tell me about you," he said quietly. "I didn't know." Jessica didn't believe him. Not then. Not after 6 months of silence. 6 months of cafeteria trays and girls crying into their pillows and counselors who smelled like antiseptic. How do you not know about your own child? How do you miss everything? Still, he held out his hand, and she took it, because somewhere deep down, some small part of her wanted it to be true that she wasn't completely alone. He took her home that same day. The house in Austin was nothing like where she'd come from. It was bright and open, with light pine floors and high ceilings. There was a deck in the back with potted plants, a bookshelf in every room. It smelled like lemon polish and fresh laundry. Lisa, his wife, met them at the door. She had warm eyes, the color of honey, and hands that looked like they were used to holding things gently. She didn't try to hug Jessica, just smiled. "You must be Jessica," she said. "We've been waiting to meet you." That word we landed oddly in Jessica's chest. They showed her to her room, bigger than any she'd known. There was a soft rug on the floor, a bed with pillows fluffed too high, and books arranged by color on white shelves. "If you don't like anything," Lisa offered, "we can change it." Jessica nodded. But she didn't say thank you. Not yet. The house was calm. Too calm. No shouting, no slammed doors. Daniel worked from a home office. Lisa ran a bakery downtown. The days fell into place like puzzle pieces. School, dinner, quiet evenings with the TV on low volume. It should have felt safe. But Jessica didn't know how to feel safe anymore. She waited for things to break, waited for footsteps too loud, for plates to crash, for hands that didn't stop at words. But none of that came. Daniel drove her to school every morning, asked about her classes, her lunch preferences. Whether she liked grilled cheese or tomato soup better, it wasn't love. But it was consistent, and that was something. Lisa packed snacks in a brown paper bag with her name written in swirly cursive on Fridays. She left little notes tucked inside. "You're braver than you think. Try your best today." That's more than enough. Sometimes Jessica kept the notes in her locker. Sometimes she threw them away before reading. It was easier not to feel too much, because feelings were slippery, and slippery things could be taken away. One weekend, while helping Lisa organize old boxes in the attic, Jessica found a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her mother's. Her chest tightened. She didn't open them right away, but that night, With the door shut and the house quiet, she sat on the floor of her room and untied the ribbon. The first letter was addressed to Daniel. It was dated 3 months before Diana died. "Don't look for us," it began. "Jessica thinks she doesn't have a father. Let it stay that way." Her mother had known. She'd kept him away on purpose. But near the end of the letter, the tone shifted. "If anything happens to me, please take care of her. She doesn't deserve to be alone." Jessica's throat went tight. She read the letters again and again, each word like a splinter beneath her skin. Her mother had pushed him away, and yet she had also asked him to come for her. So he had known. He just hadn't come fast enough. When Lisa found her crying, Jessica didn't hide the letters. She didn't say anything, just held them in her lap, hands shaking. Lisa knelt beside her. "She didn't want you to grow up carrying the weight of her mistakes," she said softly. "Sometimes love comes with impossible choices." Jessica didn't answer. She didn't know how. The next day, she didn't bring it up again. She tucked the letters in the back of her closet, let them sit like a weight she wasn't ready to carry yet. She learned how to be a daughter in that house, how to smile for pictures, how to say Dad without flinching, how to eat in silence and not feel ashamed of being hungry. Daniel was present, but distant. He asked questions, took her to appointments, wrote checks for field trips. But he didn't read bedtime stories, didn't ruffle her hair or tuck her in. And Jessica learned to live with the version of love that shows up, but doesn't hold you. Years passed, and somewhere between piano lessons and math tutors, Jessica stopped looking at him like a stranger. She started calling the house home, started believing that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something that lasted. The library at University of Chicago was old and quiet, just the way Jessica liked it. Towering shelves, creaky floors, and corners where the world seemed to forget she existed. Most students filled the campus cafes and noisy lounges, but Jessica always chose the same spot, far left table, by the frosted glass window overlooking the trees. It was her safe space. No voices, no sudden movements, no expectations, just silence and breath. She was scribbling notes one October afternoon, hair tied in a messy knot, sleeves pushed up to her elbows. Her fingers were smudged with highlighter ink. A half-empty cup of cold coffee sat next to her stack of textbooks. Then a voice low, polite. "Do you mind if I sit here? Everything else is full." She looked up. He stood there, tall, awkward in a charming way, holding a heavy stack of medical textbooks, dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much too early, but still softened when they met hers. Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." He slid into the seat, careful not to knock anything over, and opened a thick volume labeled Neuroanatomy. They didn't talk that day, just shared the table, side by side in quiet companionship. But something about the silence felt safe. His name was Alex Raymond. She didn't ask. He offered it 3 days later when they ended up at the same table again. She raised an eyebrow. "You following me?" He smiled. "Maybe." Over the next few weeks, it became routine. Same table, same hour, same kind of quiet. Sometimes he brought her an extra tea. Sometimes she saved him a seat. They didn't talk much, but the way he breathed, the way he paused between lines to really think, made Jessica feel like she was allowed to exist, just as she was. One rainy evening, while she was chewing her pen cap and fighting through child development theories, Alex leaned over and said softly, "You have beautiful hands." Jessica blinked. "What?" "Your hands," he said again. "They're calm, steady, like someone who knows how to hold fragile things." She laughed awkwardly, shrugged it off, but the comment stayed with her, because no one had ever said anything like that before. Not about her. One Saturday, they walked through Washington Park after studying. The leaves were fiery orange, crunching beneath their sneakers. He kept his hands in his pockets, but walked close enough that their arms brushed every few steps. She told him about her major early childhood education. Told him she wanted to help kids who'd been through things they couldn't name. He listened, didn't interrupt, didn't press when her voice got tight. Then asked, "What's your family like?" Jessica hesitated. "I live with my dad and his wife. They're good people. And your mom?" "She died when I was 7. I'm sorry." "It's okay," she replied. "I barely remember her face, but I remember her voice and the way she smelled like cinnamon." Alex didn't fill the silence, just nodded, then said, "My mom wore gardenia. Every time I smell it, I stop walking." Jessica smiled. It was the first time someone didn't make her story feel like a burden. By winter, they shared playlists, tea preferences, little notes on each other's textbooks. He never called it love. Neither did she. But it bloomed anyway in the quiet moments. In the way he remembered her exam dates, or the way he left her favorite granola bar on her bag without a word. Then, one night, while snow fell thick outside the library windows, Alex closed his notebook and looked at her. "There's a program in Switzerland for trauma surgery. 3 years. Once in a lifetime." Jessica's stomach dropped. He paused. "I want you to come with me." "What?" "We could make it work. I mean, maybe we get married. Start fresh. New place. New start." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. It was everything she had once dared to want. But it felt like a cliff. He saw it in her eyes. "You don't have to answer now." She didn't. And then weeks passed. Then months. She told herself she was thinking, that she needed time. But the truth, she was terrified. Not of Alex, not of Europe. She was afraid of letting someone love her too much. Because what if it disappeared? What if she woke up and he was gone? Like her mother. What if he saw the cracks and decided she wasn't worth fixing? So she drifted. Stopped showing up to the table, stopped replying to messages. And Alex, true to who he was, didn't chase. He let her choose. And she chose silence. Years later, she would call it the biggest mistake she ever made. But back then, it felt like safety. And in that space where love had once grown, someone else stepped in. Brian Carter. He noticed her after a guest lecture on educational policy. He liked her poise. Said she was polished, sharp. Said she didn't wear her past on her sleeve like other girls. Jessica thought that was a compliment. At first. He invited her to a gallery opening, then a charity dinner. Introduced her to friends in suits who talked about capital gains and lakefront condos. He said she belonged in his world. Said she was different. Said he'd never met someone so composed. And Jessica believed him. Believed she had finally become the version of herself the world respected. A woman who didn't tremble. Didn't remember broken hands or lullabies. Didn't wait for anyone to knock anymore. She said yes to his proposal at a rooftop restaurant with string lights and champagne flutes. And when she looked up at the stars that night, she told herself, "This is enough. This is stability. This is how you win." But deep down, something small whispered, "What about the boy who loved your hands? What about the man who waited at the library and never asked you to be anything but you?" The wedding was everything a magazine spread would envy: crystal chandeliers, imported white roses, champagne flutes lined in gold trim. Guests in tailored tuxedos toasted to the perfect couple. Flashing white teeth and curated compliments. Jessica wore a satin gown that hugged her like it had something to prove. Brian held her waist with practiced ease, his smile flawless for the cameras. The photos looked like joy. But her smile ached by the 3rd hour. Her cheeks hurt from holding it. No one asked how she felt. They just told her how lucky she was. And for a while she believed it. Brian Carter was the kind of man who made people lean in when he spoke. He had presence charm that turned heads in boardrooms and backyards alike. He knew which wine to pair with which course. He called waiters by name. He folded his napkin into thirds. He was safe. From the outside. He talked about strategy like it was romance. And Jessica thought maybe order could be enough. They moved into a condo overlooking Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows, concrete counters, a fridge that chimed when left open too long. Brian made spreadsheets for household budgets. Jessica arranged succulents along the kitchen sill. She started teaching 3rd grade at a charter school nearby. Her students loved her, called her Miss J, drew her pictures of rockets and cats and stick figures with pigtails. She clung to those drawings like talismans. At home, Brian was affectionate in the ways that looked good on paper, kissed her forehead when she packed his lunch, left sticky notes on the fridge that said, "Thanks for doing the laundry," with a smiley face that felt mechanical. But little by little, the compliments turned into corrections. "You're wearing that to the dinner party. Try not to bring up your childhood. It makes people uncomfortable. Don't overshare. You have a tendency to go soft." Jessica laughed the first few times. Then she stopped laughing. She thought, maybe this is just how marriage works. You compromise, you grow, you edit. But soon, the editing became erasure. He interrupted her during conversations, took credit for her ideas at gatherings, introduced her as his wife, the teacher, like a footnote. And still, she tried to be pleasant, polished, unmessy. Until the first pregnancy. It wasn't planned. But it wasn't a mistake either, not to her. She found out on a Tuesday morning, bought a tiny yellow onesie from a boutique down the block, hid it in her drawer for 2 weeks, imagining the moment she'd tell him, practiced the words in front of the mirror, smiled at her reflection even when her hands shook. When she finally told him, his reaction landed like ice water. "What the hell were you thinking?" Jessica froze. "I wasn't trying. We talked about this." He said, voice tight. "You're not ready. I'm not ready. This is not the plan." "But it's our baby." "No, it's your mistake." She stood there, mouth open, heartbeat cracking. He didn't yell. He didn't hit, but the words bruised anyway. He walked away that night. She stayed on the bathroom floor, holding the onesie like it could change the timeline. 3 weeks later, they agreed to keep it. Correction, he agreed. She begged. Her daughter Ella was born in early spring. Jessica held her for the first time under soft hospital lights, tears rolling down her face in silent streams. Ella's eyes were hers, that same searching gray. Brian arrived 2 hours later, peered at the nursery window like he was inspecting a painting. "She looks fine," he said, then kissed Jessica's forehead and left. At home, things grew quieter, not in a peaceful way, in the way a house grows still before a storm. Every cry was an inconvenience, every feeding an interruption. Why is she always crying? She's a baby, Brian. Other mothers figure this out. Jessica started memorizing the creaks in the hallway floorboards, learned how to rock Ella without making a sound, hummed lullabies with a throat raw from exhaustion. He didn't touch her with kindness anymore. He didn't touch her at all. "You've let yourself go," he said one night. "I married a woman who took care of herself." She stopped wearing makeup, stopped looking in mirrors, stopped seeing herself. She told herself this is what new mothers go through. She told herself he's just tired, just stressed. Then came Noah. Pregnancy again this time. She waited to tell him. 3 weeks. She was terrified, not of fists, but of the look, the disgust behind his fake smile. When she finally confessed, he didn't shout, just shook his head. "Are you incapable of tracking your own body?" Jessica whispered. "He's your son too." Brian didn't answer. Just walked into his office and slammed the door. She apologized, over and over, for being tired, for asking for groceries, for the noise. "Don't say sorry," he'd reply. "Say thank you that I'm still here." She started saying thank you through tears. It wasn't long before words stopped being enough for him. The first shove came when she dropped a glass in the kitchen. She bent to clean it, fingers trembling. He stepped in, saw the mess, grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise. "Clean it up." "You're not a child." I said, "I'm sorry." He pushed her against the counter. Her elbow slammed the edge. "That's the problem," he growled. "You're always sorry. Try being better." She wore long sleeves for the rest of the week. Didn't tell Lisa. Didn't tell anyone. When she got pregnant with their third Gracie, she didn't cry in the delivery room. She didn't feel much of anything. Brian didn't show up. Said he had meetings. When the nurse asked, "Is Dad on his way?" Jessica just nodded. "He's busy." At home, the house became a war zone. Brian worked late. When he came home, Ella would flinch. Noah would crawl under the dining table. Gracie, still an infant, would scream uncontrollably the moment his voice filled the room. Jessica stopped trying to reason, stopped begging, just moved like a ghost between cribs and laundry and floorboards. Until one night, Ella crawled into her bed, curled beside her, tiny arms wrapped around Jessica's waist. "Mommy," she whispered, "I don't like when Daddy's home." Jessica didn't breathe, didn't blink. Because in that one sentence, her daughter named the fear she'd spent years trying to bury. And in that moment, Jessica realized it wasn't about her anymore. It was about what Ella was learning to call love. The next morning, Jessica stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her face was pale, lips cracked. The skin beneath her eyes hung heavy, hollowed out by years of pretending she was okay. Her reflection looked like a stranger, one she didn't remember inviting in. That night, she packed a bag, just one, for her and the kids. She didn't cry, didn't hesitate. She placed Ella's favorite stuffed fox at the bottom, Noah's sneakers, Gracie's tiny blanket. She left behind her wedding ring on the nightstand. The diamond still sparkled under the lamp, cold and precise. Just like Brian. Her plan was simple: leave in the morning, take the kids to the park, then drive to Lisa's house. Lisa had given her an address once. Quietly. After noticing the bruises beneath the sleeve, Jessica hadn't rolled up all the way. "If you ever need to breathe," she said, "come here." Jessica memorized it, never wrote it down. She didn't want Brian to find it, but fear had a way of dragging its feet. She waited too long. That night, Brian came home early. She was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, trying to act normal, even though her heart was punching her ribs from the inside. He dropped his gym bag, walked past her without a word, but then stopped. "Where were you today?" Jessica's hand froze mid-wipe. "Just took the kids for a drive." "Where?" "To the park." His voice darkened. "Which park?" "Lincoln Square," she lied. Brian turned toward her slowly. "You went to your father's, didn't you?" She said nothing. "That was her mistake." He stepped closer. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" "I didn't." He raised his hand. "Open palm." The slap echoed. She stumbled back, caught herself on the counter. Tasted blood. "From down the hallway," Gracie cried. Ella's voice followed, panicked. "Mommy." Jessica's hand clutched her cheek. The heat. The sting. Brian's eyes burned. "Look what you did. You scared them." He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. But this time, something shifted. Jessica's knees shook, but not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't love. This was war. That night, she sat in the bathroom, door locked, legs tucked to her chest. Her lip throbbed. Her cheek had turned a deep purple blue. She pulled open the drawer beneath the sink. Tucked inside an old box of hair ties was the receipt. The one Lisa had written on, Women's Help Center, a number scrawled in blue ink. Her hands trembled as she dialed. A soft, steady voice answered, "This is the Women's Helpline. Are you safe right now?" "No," Jessica whispered. "My husband. He hurts me. The kids see it." "We can help you," the woman said. "Do you have somewhere to go?" "No. Just Lisa's. But he'll find us. We'll help you stay hidden." "How many children?" "3, all under 7. We'll move quickly. Come in the morning. We'll be ready." Jessica closed the phone, pressed her head to her knees, and for the first time in years, she felt relief. But she didn't get the morning. She didn't even get dawn. Brian knocked on the bathroom door 30 minutes later. Who were you talking to? Jessica fumbled the phone behind her. Tanya, from college. You haven't talked to Tanya in 2 years. He yanked the phone from her hand, scrolled through the call log, redialed the number. The same soft voice came through. Women's Help Center, how can we... He ended the call, turned slowly, his face drained of color, and then filled with something far worse. So that's it, he said, almost laughing. You were going to run. Jessica backed away. Brian, please. You think you're taking my kids? You think I'll just let you go? He stepped forward. Fist clenched. And then, the doorbell rang. Once, long, clear. They both froze. It rang again. Jessica's pulse raced. Brian hissed. Who the hell is that? I don't know. You better not be lying again. He grabbed her wrist, shoved her toward the entryway. Open it and smile. Her legs moved without thought. The bag she'd packed sat behind the couch, half-zipped, hidden. She reached the door, peeked through the peephole, and for a second, just a second, she thought she imagined him. But no, it was real. Alex, he stood on the porch, wearing a dark coat, snow in his hair, eyes the same soft gray. Jessica, he said, calm, steady. Please open the door. Behind her, Brian's breath came hot against her neck. Who is it? She swallowed. A friend. From where? College. Open it, now. She turned the lock with shaking hands. Opened the door. Alex stepped forward into the light, took one look at her face. Split lip, swollen cheek, eyes ringed in red. He didn't ask questions. Hey, Jess, he said gently. Brian appeared beside her, puffing up. And who exactly are you? Alex Raymond, he replied. Old friend. Well, Jessica's a married woman now. You should probably leave. Alex didn't flinch. He glanced at her again, then looked Brian in the eye. If she asks me to go, I'll go. Otherwise, I'm staying. Brian laughed. Dry and mean. You don't make decisions in my house. Alex stepped inside. Not aggressive, just present. Brian stepped back. Just a little, but Jessica saw it. He was afraid, not of Alex, but of losing control. In the hallway, Gracie wailed. Ella's voice called out. Mommy Noah whimpered. I need to check on them, Jessica said. Brian grabbed her wrist. They can wait. No, they can't, Alex said, his voice turning steel. Brian turned on him. What business is this of yours? Alex stepped forward. Not angry, just solid. When it comes to Jessica and her children, everything. Brian lunged, swung a fist. Alex caught it fast, twisted, pressed him against the wall. Brian struggled, cursed. You'll regret this. Alex didn't blink. I doubt it. Behind them, the apartment door creaked open again. Their downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, stepped inside, holding up her phone. I've been recording every scream, every crash, every night. She looked at Jessica. I called the shelter myself. And if he hadn't shown up tonight, I would have walked through that door myself. Brian's mouth opened, then closed. Color drained from his face. Alex released him. Turned to Jessica. Get your things. Get the kids. You're not spending another night here. And this time, she didn't hesitate. The drive to the shelter felt longer than it was. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, gripping Alex's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The kids were asleep in the back. Gracie curled against Ella. Noah's tiny arm draped over a pillow. The streetlights blurred past in gold streaks, soft and dreamlike. Alex didn't speak much. He just drove with one hand, steady, present, like he always had. At the shelter, a woman named Marissa greeted them at the door. She wore a navy cardigan and sneakers with worn soles. Her voice was calm, practiced, but her eyes were sharp. She didn't flinch when she saw Jessica's face. Didn't gasp or pity. She nodded once. You're safe now, inside. The space was quiet, not sterile like the facility Jessica had once known. This was different. Warm lighting, fleece blankets stacked on shelves, walls painted soft pastel colors. The rooms smelled like lemon and something clean lavender, maybe. While Jessica filled out paperwork with a trembling hand, Marissa brought juice boxes to the kids. Let them pick from a drawer of stuffed animals. Noah chose a one-eyed teddy bear. Ella picked a unicorn with a frayed tail. Gracie just wanted Jessica. They spent the first night in a small room with 2 bunk beds and a rocking chair. Jessica sat on the edge of the mattress while the kids drifted off, one by one. She couldn't sleep, her body too used to flinching at every creak, every shadow. Alex knocked once, poked his head in. "You okay?" Jessica nodded, but her voice broke anyway. "I don't know how to be normal." Alex stepped inside. "You don't have to be. You just have to be here." The next morning, the sun streamed through a high window, and for the first time in years, Jessica woke up without fear. The days blurred chaos wrapped in comfort. Custody filings, legal meetings, therapy sessions. Ella started sleeping through the night. Noah made a friend who liked dinosaurs just as much as he did. Gracie learned how to laugh, really laugh without looking around first. Jessica still flinched when someone closed a door too hard, still paused when the phone rang unexpectedly. But the weight began to shift. Alex stayed close, not hovering, not pushing, just there. One afternoon, he showed up with a box wrapped in brown paper. "It's not a ring," he said quickly. "Don't panic." Jessica laughed, really laughed. Inside was a silver pendant, a tree, with roots curled beneath the surface. "The tree of life," he said. "For strength, for growth, for starting again." She wore it every day after that. Weeks turned into months. A job opened at a small preschool near the hospital. They needed someone who understood children with trauma. Jessica almost didn't apply, but Alex looked her in the eye and said, "You are exactly who they need." And for the first time in her life, she believed it too. It was late past midnight. The shelter was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't hum with dread, but with peace. Jessica sat alone at the small desk by the window, the moonlight pouring over scattered drawings, crayon hearts, and stick figures with messy smiles. Ella had drawn them earlier that day: Mommy, Noah, Gracie, and a tall man with curly hair holding a coffee cup. Above them, she wrote in shaky letters, "This is our safe place." Jessica smiled, then opened her laptop. She stared at the blank document for a long time. The cursor blinked steady, unapologetic, and finally, she began to type, "To the man I once married, you told me no one else would want me, that I was too soft, too ordinary, too broken. For years, I believed you. I believed shrinking myself made me worthy of staying. I believed walking on eggshells was love. I believed your silence was strength. But I don't believe that anymore. You didn't stay out of love. You stayed because you liked control. You mistook obedience for devotion. But here's what you never understood. Soft doesn't mean weak. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. And leaving, that didn't make me a failure. It made me free." She didn't need to send the letter, didn't even print it. The power was never in the delivery. It was in writing it, in choosing to let go. She closed the laptop, walked over to where Alex had fallen asleep on the couch, book still resting on his chest. He stirred when she brushed her fingers across his hand. "You okay?" he murmured. Jessica nodded. "I just needed to finish something." He smiled, eyes still half closed. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world felt still just for a moment. Jessica stood at the window, watching the moonlight soften the corners of the world. She thought of all the women still stuck, still silent, and she whispered, barely audible, "You're not alone." Because the truth is, freedom doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it starts with one decision, one voice, one woman choosing to believe she is enough, not perfect, not unbroken, but enough.